So I'm just going to say welcome and thank you all for attending this live event to celebrate World AIDS Day. I'm Laura Whitaker-Jones, the head of marketing and PR at Watkins Books, and I'm so proud to introduce Derek Frost's upcoming memoir, Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS, to you all today. The book will hit shelves globally on the 13th of April, so please mark the day in your calendar. All of us at Watkins are very excited about this book and proud of our role in making it possible and making it available to book readers internationally. To repeat the quote from the acclaimed UK commentator Matthew Paris, this book is both a history and an inspiration. Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS is a tale of a devastating pandemic, of lives cut painfully short, and most importantly of all, it's also a love letter. Derek Frost is a distinguished designer and artist. Jay, his husband, is a pioneering entrepreneur and amongst many other businesses, the creator of the Embassy Club, London's equivalent to New York Studio 54, and Heaven, Europe's largest gay dance club. Derek and Jay met and fell in love more than 40 years ago. Their lives together remain as they always have been, high octane, full of adventure, and fearless creativity. Derek's heartfelt memoir is about joy and triumph, about facing universal challenges, and about the great rewards that come from giving back. He speaks for a generation who lived through a global health crisis that many in society refuse even to acknowledge. His is a powerful story chronicling extraordinary times. The first half of this live event will give Derek the opportunity to introduce himself, to read some excerpts from his memoir, and to answer a few questions that I'd like to ask him. If you, our amazing audience, have questions you'd like to ask Derek, please input these into this video chat line together with your name. Hit send, and I would be happy to ask Derek your question during the Q&A session. And at the end of the Q&A session, I'll leave time for Derek I'll leave time for conclusion and to allow Derek to read a final excerpt from his memoir. So let's start with a subject of universal interest. Let's start with love.
Sweet Laura. Thank you, Laura, for your very, very super introduction. And thank you, all of you, I know from various parts of the globe, many parts of the globe, for attending this World AIDS Day live event and for your interest in my memoir. I'm more than happy to have you all with us. Welcome. And so, to the important subject of love, about which I'd like to read you an extract from my memoir, a piece from the memoir that comes fairly on in the book. There are few more romantic places than the Boulevard de la Croisette at Cannes. A necklace of perfectly groomed white sand fringes an azure bay. Along its length, beautifully appointed beach clubs set out regimented armies of matching loungers and umbrellas attended by bronzed beauties. Cantilevered over the back of the beach is the great promenade par excellence. Along it, lines of giant terracotta pots overflowing with summer flowers stand sentinel. Here, on this broad sweep overlooking the bay, the fashion crowd and the beach crowd mix with coiffured local ladies out with their high-stepping dogs. The boulevard, along which only the smartest cars seem to drive, is set back from the promenade. Divided from it by a carpet of manicured lawn in which stands a line of umbrella pines and immaculately pruned palms. To its landward side are Les Hôtels, white Edwardian confections standing adjacent to the best restaurants and the chicest shops. All come here to see and be seen. All seems perfection. What a scene. Certainly enough to turn a young boy's head. During that weekend, And in that wonderful place, unexpectedly, simultaneously, Jay and I fall in love. I remember the exact moment. We're walking off the beach to join the evening passeggiata along the Croisette. We stroll hand in hand amongst the sun-kissed throng and come together in a way that requires no words. Suddenly, there's an absolute knowing. What we experience is a mutual opening that is nothing like making a choice. Something entirely different happens. A force that is bigger and more powerful takes charge. Bang, and we're committed to sharing the rest of our lives. Our broad grins must have announced the fact to all who pass us, so great is our happiness. What is this love? What sort of overwhelmingly joyous and powerful event occurs when one is fortunate in life and meets one's soulmate and recognizes it? Each remains an individual, but finds that they have become completely joined to the other. It has much to do with mutual trust, honesty, and respect. I trust this person sufficiently to put my life into their care. They feel the same. For me, and for Jay, this is the love and the completeness that we now feel for each other. We do not choose to fall in love. There is no choice. Love finds us. Through love, we find home in each other.
Derek, that is so beautiful. I'm tearing up even now just hearing you read it. I mean, I teared up the first time that I read it on the page, and now I'm tearing up even more, listening to you read it now. It's just beautiful and such a true testament to being a soulmate and to finding true love.
Well, it's a very great fortune, very great fortune.
Oh, it's just brilliant. And, in addition to this story that you shared of your love, which is just so profound, it's now clear that the Embassy Club in heaven made a greater contribution to societal advances that might then have even been imagined. So to illustrate this fact, I'd like to quote from your memoir. At both the Embassy Club and heaven, Jay's important role in facilitating gay liberation and celebration helps more queer people than we will ever know to come out, to live lives that are true to their own nature, and to find it possible to celebrate their sexuality joyously and publicly. Do you consider this to be your finest legacy?
Well, it's very sweet of you to ask. To be perfectly honest, I've never really considered the subject of legacy. In my legacy, Jeremy's legacy. But the fact is that heaven, which we started all those years back, is amazingly still open 40 years on. And a film is currently in production to celebrate this anniversary. Just the other day, we received a copy of the film's promo. And in this, quoted in this, the journalist Cheryl Garrett makes a remarkable statement. I mean, a remarkable statement. When she says, and I quote, "Places like heaven mean we now have gay marriage." If Jay and I have contributed to the arrival of gay marriage, then this is certainly a legacy we are very proud of.
Derek, that's profound. I mean, that is a heck of a legacy to leave behind. And, we're just the better for you having contributed to this and to have worked so hard to change our world and make it a better place. That is definitely something to be proud of.
But contribution, though, I mean, us amongst a million others, but if you contributed, then we're delighted and very proud, I guess is the right word. Certainly very pleased to have done so.
I've always thought that it takes just one voice among many, and then it's the swell of the many voices that just make something possible. And, today we're celebrating World AIDS Day, which is such an important day. And there are so many voices, that are being heard today. And there's so many voices that aren't even being heard today as people are gathering their courage to speak their truths. And so I wanted to ask you, why does continuing to do so remain important when for many, AIDS is no longer a life-threatening condition?
Well, to give you a little bit of history, you probably know this. The original World AIDS Day was first celebrated in December 1988, 32 years ago. And it was a day dedicated to raising awareness about the AIDS pandemic and to remembering lives lost to the disease. To date, 40 million lives lost, of which, sadly, 1 million were lost last year in 2019. By this, it's clear that celebrating World AIDS Day remains as important now as it did all those years ago. The big change, though, the major change, is that all the many international initiatives now working to defeat AIDS are fighting an increasingly triumphant battle. Year on year, fewer and fewer are dying, and before too long, it's becoming clear the dying will stop. I'd like to read to you 3 excerpts from my memoir about 2 of my own experiences during former World AIDS Days, it's a hard word to say, World AIDS Days, and about another celebrated by the former US President, Bill Clinton. World AIDS Day, 1st December 2002. Andrew and I go to Guguletu, a township outside Cape Town, to celebrate the day with Dr. Kwesi Matoti and 30 of his HIV-positive patients. His clinic is a simple shack with a corrugated tin roof, set along a dusty pathway where similar shacks lie packed one against the other. You hear the sounds of conversation, music, and domestic chores. There's a smell of food and rubbish. The atmosphere is curiously upbeat, despite the harsh reality of these people's lives. Dr. Kwesi asked me to light a candle on his small desk. We all form a circle and join hands. A beautiful young man sings a prayer asking to be spared death. He sings with a wonderfully deep voice in his language, Xhosa. All are moved by his prayer. Many in our circle face imminent death. There are tears. Some are mine. I spent World AIDS Day, December 2010, celebrating with FXB in Burma. It's a joyful event, well attended by young and old alike. There is singing and dancing. My short address to the crowd is received with clapping and cheering. During the party, I meet with 19 of our 20 former AIDS-ARC beneficiaries. One missing member of the group has died, but the rest are enjoying good health and living normal working lives. Each brings with them their golden elephant, our gift. Thanks to FXB and AIDS-ARC, we are reborn, they tell me. What better gift could I hope for on such an important day? Late spring 2019, we visit the National AIDS Memorial Grove in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, whose mission is to provide in perpetuity a place of remembrance so that the lives of people who died from AIDS are not forgotten and their story remains known by future generations. It's a hauntingly beautiful place and most lovingly tended. Unlike a cruel President Reagan, a kinder President Clinton visited the Grove on World AIDS Day, December 2017, and made the following dedication which is carved into a great rock bearing his name. We must continue to work together as a nation to further our progress against this deadly epidemic. And while we do so, we must remember that every person who is living with HIV or AIDS is someone's son or daughter, brother or sister, parent or grandparent. They deserve our respect, and they need our love.
That's phenomenally beautiful, Derek. And
very, very moving, very sweet what he had to say.
I love that. And I actually had no idea that I'd never read the full dedication until you just shared it with us now in the book and at this event. And I just think that that's profoundly moving. Yes. Wow. So, in your memoir, you often use humor to make serious observations about, for example, the shockingly delayed responses to the then unfolding AIDS epidemic. I would love for you to read us one such passage.
Well, I'm delighted. It'll also maybe cheer me up, or at least stop the bug in my throat, whatever. Sorry.
Moving from the emotional to the humorous.
Anyhow, this is an excerpt about everyone's favorite subject, or maybe not favorite subject, safe sex. When we first went to Florida in 1981, we visited Miami's South Beach to see the Deco-style buildings which run along the landward side of that deep stretch of perfect white sand. Then, their beauty and architectural importance was concealed by years of neglect. Most were home to low-grade old people's homes and run-down boarding houses. However, by the late 1980s, fancy fags, mostly from New York City, and famously Gianni Versace, came to South Beach looking for a winter beachside hangout that is more urban than Key West. Out go the old people and the low-rent occupants, and in come the gays with their paint pots and candy colors and stylish ways. The Deco buildings become hip hotels that look better and more polished than ever before. Where once there were broken rockers looking over a silent beachside road, now there are smart cafes, margaritas, fancy cars, and loud dance music. Every day becomes a beachfront fashion parade. The perfect sand fills with bronzing, buffed bodies and camp chatter. Even the lifeguards up their game and appear to have stepped off the cover of GQ magazine. South Beach and Key West draws young HIV-positive men from across the US. They come to warm in the sunshine, swim in the ocean, cool under the shade of palm trees, and find comfort in the sea breeze. Mostly they seek the support and companies of others who are positive, and those who they believe will be sympathetic to their plight. Mostly they wait to get sick and to die. When talk on the beach turns serious, you can be sure safe sex is discussed. There is no effective medication, and prevention is the only advice we receive. Happily, we learn from doctors that sucking without a condom seems safe. No one's quite sure, but most take the risk. Even flavored condoms don't taste great. As everyone now knows, safe sex means wearing a condom when having penetrative sex. Easy in the cold light of day, but harder to action when you're excited, hot, want to do a good job, in a rush, don't want to mess up or go soft, drunk, high, and having a lot of fun. Pulling on a condom is frankly a bit of a bore and not something you really want to pause to do. We all try making putting one on part of the fun, and we're all getting better at it. For many of us, it becomes a bit like wearing a seatbelt in the car. You just don't feel safe, and else it's clunk, click every trip, as the old advertisement used to go. Pull it on before you slip it in becomes our equivalent mantra. Shockingly, the US Federal Drug Administration do not allow manufacturers to publicly advertise condoms as a preventative against HIV/AIDS until 1987.
Derek, I cannot believe that it took them until 1987 to publicly advertise condoms as a preventative against HIV/AIDS. That's shocking to me.
Reagan was leading the country, and it came from the top. And Reagan, was not interested in people dying of AIDS,
Wow, that's just crazy. I mean, in your memoir, you describe in heartfelt detail Jay's personal battle to survive AIDS, how for you, a transformation of the spirit occurred during this time, and how this gave birth to AIDS Arc, the charity you both founded in 2002, and which has now helped to save more than 1,000 HIV-positive lives and counting. I would love for you to share an excerpt from your memoir about one of your many AIDS Arc trips to meet doctors and beneficiaries.
The excerpt I've picked describes the most memorable day in my life, a day that was of particular joy to me. It was the day when I first met some of our original Indian AIDS Arc beneficiaries. Our beneficiaries come with spouses and children. Some also bring parents. All without exception are poor working people who show clear evidence of the hard lives they lead. Dark lines caused by years of heavy toil and worry cross their faces. Some are terribly thin. Those who are positive still show signs of the many illnesses with which I've become all too familiar. Their children, largely ignorant of the plight of their parents, gaze at me with big, beautiful dark eyes. Without FXB and AIDS Arc, these children might now be orphans, might be homeless, hungry, and abandoned. Through translation, we talk. It's a big day for us all. The dramatic physical and psychological changes that 7 months access to ARVs has brought is amazing, seemingly a miracle. Within months of starting treatment, each beneficiary describes how new strength and hope streamed back into them. They now know they have escaped premature death, that they will be well again. To meet them is thrilling. All who attend the event are moved and inspired by what they see and hear. There are happy tears, theirs and mine. Some try to kiss my feet, but I don't allow this. Their restored health is sufficient reward. There are certain days in one's life that are filled with a heightened joy, the sweetness of gratitude, and the presence of grace. For all of us there, this was one such day. I meet AIDS Arc's youngest beneficiary, Benjamin, then age 7. He comes to the clinic with his grandmother, Chandrama. Benjamin was born positive. His mother and father both died of AIDS. His remaining family and the wider community thought him cursed and turned their backs on him. Only his grandmother showed the boy love and cared for him. Benjamin was constantly sick. At the age of 2, he caught meningitis, which caused him some permanent brain damage. He then fought off 3 bouts of bacterial pneumonia and suffered from recurrent chronic diarrhea and skin infections. From Chandrama, he was too weak to stand and stayed mostly on the bed. Dr. Raju describes Benjamin as the most deserving candidate amongst all the beneficiaries. On this special day, I meet a happy, laughing boy and his delighted grandmother. Benjamin is a lovely child with the sweetest smile. After only 7 months on ARVs, His health is remarkably improved, reports Dr. Raju. He's completely symptom-free. His weight and physical activity have increased. His community think he's been visited by God and now revere him. This is the power of ART.
Wow, Derek, what a tremendous impact you have made, you and AIDS-ARC and every organization around the world that has fought to bring medical care to everyone who is suffering from AIDS. That's just so profound. I'm speaking on behalf of my team, and also I know on behalf of Ella, who's your editor. We're just so proud to have this book at Walk-Ins. And I feel privileged that I've had the chance to ask you a few of my questions. And I just want to take a moment to open up the room to some of the questions from all of the attendees here today. So the first question that came in is from Gordon Oliver. He said, Derek, in terms of your and Jay's journey, what is the essence of living and loving? Love that question.
What is the essence of living and loving? Now, I know this Gordon. He's a very bright guy. I thought he'd ask a kind of difficult question that I'm kind of fumbling over. The essence of living and loving. Well, I guess the essence of living is loving. You know, if you're lucky enough to have love in your life, love for a person, for your family, love for the planet, and if you also share love, in whatever form that means, then you live well. That's what makes sense of living and loving.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Perfect answer. So one from Dominique, looking back, what do you think were the principal factors that led to gays being fully accepted in the USA and Europe? And looking forward, what do you think needs to happen for countries like India and Africa for a greater acceptance of being gay?
Can you just ask the first question first?
Sure. Let me start off with the first. So looking back, what do you think were the principal factors that led to gays being fully accepted in the USA and Europe?
Well, I think we were responsible. You know, we initiated a huge, you know, activist movement, really. You know, it started with Stonewall, or it maybe started sooner than that, where we just said, basically, if you'll excuse the language, you know, fuck you. You know, we're not going to be put up. You know, we're not going to put up with being pushed around. And from that moment, you know, gay activism started evolving this huge momentum. And so many of us, you know, came out of the closet, basically, and we became an insurmountable force that had to be acknowledged. And then people started to accept, you know, the huge contribution we make to society. And then I think also AIDS, you know, the death of so many of us, you know, of course, many other people died, but in the early days, so many, overwhelming number were gay, that I think, you know, people had a huge sympathy for us. You know, they realized, you know, the tragedy of what was going on, that in the middle of our celebration, this huge liberation movement, that we were struck down in this appalling way. And it is incredible. I mean, you know, you ask Mr. Joe Average in the pub, you know, some guy in the pub, you know, what he thinks about gays now, particularly in England. And it's like, oh yeah, gays are cool, man. You know, we all love the gays. You know, it's like it is extraordinary, really, to be as accepted as we are, and it's the greatest possible joy. The second part of the question, I believe, can you just repeat, Laura, was about Africa and...
Yes. So the second part was, what do you think needs to happen for countries like India and in Africa for a greater acceptance of being gay? Great question, by the way, Dominique.
Yeah. I mean, two very different places, obviously. You know, India is a far more integrated place that could be called a country. Africa is this vast continent, you know, which has, you know, within it, at the deep south of it, the supposed rainbow nation with the most advanced constitution about gays, you know, propelled by the advent of the end of apartheid and Mr. Mandela, etc. You know, religion has got a lot to do with the problem, you know. unfortunately, amongst, a lot of religious people or a certain number of religious people, there is a very, very strong conservatism and a sense that we are evil and that we're on the way to hell. That's what that would be God's judgment. Now, of course, there are many religious people who don't believe that to be the case. But in India and in vast swathes of Africa, India, I suppose, I think the Hindu people are slightly more relaxed about things. Maybe the Muslim people there are less relaxed. And in Africa, has this huge, huge, huge number of fundamental Christian people. We need to persuade them that we're good guys. And it's very, very encouraging to hear that Pope Francis, has said gay marriage is okay and seems to be coming out on the side of us gays. It's slightly sad to hear that, one of my big heroes, the Dalai Lama, is still a little confused about us. But, we're winning. We're definitely winning. But there are pockets, too many pockets around the world where this is not the case. And, it was only last year when the Sultan of Brunei and his lot decided it was perfectly okay to stone some of us to death. But it's changing.
So from Joe, what do you think are the challenges of newly diagnosed people in the post-ARV world? And what should activists do to support people living with HIV in meeting these challenges?
Right. There are people becoming infected with HIV, of course, all across the world. If you think about people becoming infected in what we call the West, say in Europe or America or, it's in a kind of way not that big a deal. They go to the clinic, it's just like having gonorrhea or syphilis or some other STD. You go to the clinic, you get the drugs, you're fine. And it's not such a big trauma, I would suppose, although it's easy for one to say that. The problem is mostly for people who come from very different types of societies where there's still huge amounts of stigma, and where, although they may have accessed the drugs, they may not necessarily they may know that they're not going to die because they're HIV positive. They still face this incredible weight of stigma, whereby just being positive itself is a ghastly, ghastly thing for them to be and for their families to accept. So for some, it's really hardly a big deal. And for others, it's a very, very big deal. Now, there was a second part to that question. Can you just repeat that, Laura?
Yes. So what should activists do to support people living with HIV in meeting those challenges?
Well, I guess perhaps take the advice of Mr. Clinton. Love them, nurture them, look after them. In countries where it's very difficult to be HIV positive and where it's still very difficult to be gay, then there's still a huge amount of work to be done. And, there are any number of there's an organization, 3 organizations, one that comes to mind is All Out that we follow. And they have roots to many, many gay HIV type organizations around the world. And there's a continual, it's very easy to contact those kinds of organizations to lend support. And I think that would be a great thing to do, to support a group in Russia or a group in, so many, Iran, et cetera, et cetera. It's not so difficult to make contact with those people and lend your support, your moral support, your financial support. And that's something that we do and you might also want to consider doing.
Derek, I think that's brilliant. Those are all great ideas. A fun question that came in from Waylon. In what way did gay club culture, as you experienced in heaven, change over the course of the proliferation of HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s?
Right. Well, if you're talking about me personally, I never stopped dancing. And judging by all the other clubs I went to, none of us stopped dancing. Despite the sadness that was going on through some of those years, we continue to celebrate life. We continue to celebrate life. I don't know enough about the actual sort of music culture and about how things changed, how the nature of the music changed. Clubs still exist. People will always want to dance. People will always want to celebrate. And great that they do. You know, we weren't going to allow AIDS to flatten us. Sadly, it killed some of our friends. But for those of us who were lucky enough to survive, it didn't flatten us. We kept partying.
I'm just going to say that our new team mantra is going to be your quote, never stop dancing. Life advice from Derek Frost. We're going to get that framed so that it can go up in front of all of our desks.
Perfect.
Love it.
Perfect.
So this question came in from Larry. What advice would you give to someone who wants to write a memoir?
I mean, I guess for some, the reason is to do with ego, you know, because I don't know, maybe that's not a fair way to start. I like to think that what motivated me to write what I've written was not to do with ego, but it was to do with the fact that I thought I had something that was important to say. It took a huge amount of work to write what I wrote, huge amount of research, and what motivated me was because I really knew I had something important to say, and also because I'd had some number of experiences that led me to feel not that I had an expertise, but that I had a certain insight into the subject that I was focusing on and writing about. What motivated me to write was a desire to share a history which I thought particularly younger people might not know about, and a desire to inspire people to make more sense of their own lives. That's what motivated me to do it. From a more technical point of view, I was very fortunate because during the sort of hippie trip period of my life, I kept a short diary. During the 6 years that Jeremy was fighting AIDS before the advent of effective medication, I kept a very, very full diary, which was a sort of, it was a very private thing that I wrote, and it was kind of like my in-house private shrink kind of thing, someone to scream privately at. And that was very useful. So I had references to go to. And then also through the period of AIDS art, because it was a business and you need to keep records. So I had a lot of references to go to. And of course, then there's wonderful Mr. Google and Mr. Wikipedia. So makes research easier. So I hope, did that answer? Just repeat Larry's question, would you? Make sure I answered that.
Sure. So Larry's question was, what advice would you give to someone who wants to write a memoir?
Go for it. If you feel you've got something that's worthwhile saying, if you've got something, I mean, when I started what I wrote, what I first did was I wrote about the history of the charity AIDS art, because I thought that would be useful for the charity to know about. I showed it to my brother-in-law, who has a lifelong knowledge of the publishing world and writing. And he said, look, frankly, this is not of interest to anyone unless you're prepared to really delve deep into yourself and talk about yourself. And I thought about that for a while and thought, do I really want to kind of expose myself to people? And I thought, because of the reasons I've already said, yes, that I did. And so that's what's happened. And hopefully by that, it will be of interest to a wider body of people, may even have a universal interest. That would be great.
Derek, as somebody who has read your full memoir, I have to say that it's one of the best memoirs that I've ever read. And I'm saying that completely unbiased, despite the fact that I work for Walk-ins. It's profoundly moving and so touching. And I cannot wait for everybody here to have the chance to read it. So I think that's excellent advice. And I, for one, am very glad that you wrote a memoir and that you took that leap and made that decision.
Well, I'm very glad that Watkins decided to publish it. That was the biggest thrill of all time, to have a publisher. I mean, I think I'm allowed to say you guys even paid me in advance, which is like, whoa, in advance. Wow, that's great.
It's phenomenal. And, your editor, Ella, is here on this call. And I know that the two of you guys have worked so closely together to make this book utterly profound. So I'm going to give Ella a shout out as well.
Yeah. Mother Ella. Thank you, Ella.
So we had a question that came in from Tom Frost. And Tom asked, what do you think the ultimate goal of the movement is?
Which movement is Tom referring to?
Tom, do you want to write in which movement you're referring to, and I can ask Derek?
Tom is my nephew. Are you getting an answer there from Tom?
I'm just waiting for Tom to write in. That's okay.
So I'd like to help, but I'm not quite sure exactly what movement do you suppose Tom's meaning?
Maybe the movement in terms of making AIDS medicine. Oh, here he comes. He says, I suppose the gay movement, acceptance from the man in the pub, gay marriage. What is the ultimate goal?
What is the ultimate? Just to rephrase the question. Now I know it's about the gay movement. Just rephrase.
So let me go back. He says, what do you think the ultimate goal of the gay movement is?
To be completely accepted by everyone, to be celebrated, to just that really, for us to be treated equally with everyone else, but also for our very, very special, and I do think we have very, very special skills and sensibilities, not that others don't, but there is something particular to being gay. And what's exciting is that is now so celebrated. So to be celebrated and to be accepted and to be loved just like everyone else.
I think that is perfect. Absolutely perfect. So I just asked everybody else if they had any other questions that they wanted to share. But one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, what do you think is the biggest misconception about living with AIDS?
I saw that you had drafted that question, and I had sort of pondered it a bit. Just what is the biggest misconception? I don't think I arrived at an answer to that. Misconception about living with AIDS, because it's so different for so many different people. For example, for someone who's newly diagnosed, who lives in the West, who gets on the drugs, doesn't have a problem telling people they're gay, still gets plenty of sex, is not infecting other people, blah, blah, blah. They don't kind of have a problem. For someone like Jeremy, who has a zero viral load, so he can't infect anyone, he in that sense, his life's not complicated in that way, but because he's been on the drugs for so long, he suffers multiple side effects from all the drugs, which are very debilitating. And I think people probably looking at him think, well, he's on the drugs, it's absolutely fine, he doesn't have a problem. Well, he does have a problem, but he gets on with life and he's having a great life. So he only has a little problem. Now, there are other people who have AIDS in some of the other countries where I've worked, whose life is utterly ghastly, even if they're well, because they have AIDS or because they're gay. So maybe the misapprehension, the miscomprehension, whichever word was used, amongst Western people, say, about people who live in a fundamentalist Muslim country being gay or having AIDS, is that their problems and their issues are exactly the same as the issues facing Mr. Friend down the street in Chelsea. Well, clearly they're not, So if that's the sort of misapprehension, for some people, being gay and living with HIV, or not being gay and living with HIV, can be still ghastly.
Okay, I had one more question that I really wanted to ask you, Derek, and it's pretty relevant to our current situation with COVID. You say in the book that despite the fear, these times are some of the best times when we are at our closest. Joy remains present. So how did you cope in difficult times, and what is your advice for staying positive? I think we're all going through a somewhat strange time right now, and would appreciate any advice that you had to share about really having hope in the midst of a challenging situation.
Yeah. Well, I'm no guru, you know. I mean, I don't feel in any way that I have any particular skills or experience to impart. So I'm just Joe on the street, pretty much. But what I meant by what I said in the piece that you just mentioned is that, you know, life is very precious and very short. And when you feel that maybe life is going to be taken away from you, it actually becomes, or for us, became even more special. You know, I mean, there's this thing about live every day as if it was your last. It's kind of quite good advice.
I love that.
You know, not sort of be in fear of the end, but, you know, if you know that this is the last sunrise you're ever going to see, you know, you really look at it, you really enjoy it, it's utterly amazing. And that's what I mean, really, you know, and it applies to everything, really. Flowers, love, people, the bus going by, you know. So, you know, it is a frightening time right now, and COVID is, in a sense, a lot more frightening than AIDS or HIV infection, because it's so much easier to become infected. I mean, that's just a fact of life, you know, but there's also some pretty encouraging stuff going on, like most people don't die, you know, life will go on. And there's this promise, or, you know, it seems that the vaccine's just around the corner. So, you know, that's really very exciting. But in terms of day to day, you know, some people are obviously extremely frightened. They're holed up in their houses, you know, old folk like us, you know, are like, whoa, you know, it's like maybe this is, I mean, someone said to me the other day, in fact, one of the people who's in the audience right now, I can say his name, Richard, and he sent me this thing the other day, and he said, well, we managed to scrape through one pandemic. Let's hope this one doesn't get us. So, you know, I guess one could laugh, you know. I mean, it's what we feel. I mean, but, you know, I'm 68. You know, I'm incredibly lucky to have got here. And every day is wonderful. And I know during the time when we thought maybe Jeremy's life or the life of our friends might be numbered in weeks or months, there was a sense that every moment as it went by was like a magic moment. And that was very special. And it's important to sort of live every day a bit like that, to remind you that it could be your last, and not to waste a moment of it.
I think on that note, Derek, because it's such a good note, that we should draw this live event to an end. And I just want to thank you all for attending. And we hope that you've enjoyed meeting Derek and hearing about his memoir. And we're hoping that you'll be happy to act as ambassadors in spreading the word through your own social media platforms and otherwise to your contacts and friends about the forthcoming arrival of Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS. This is such a phenomenal book, and we're so proud of it. And to remind you, the book will publish on April 13th, but pre-ordering is already available through both Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk, and also through PenguinRandomHouse.com. Penguin Random House, you know, at wherever you are in the world, carries the book. So you just have to look at Penguin Random House within your home country. And also, please know that all revenue due to the author from sales will be donated to AIDSARC. And as we come to the conclusion of today's monumental event, let's end where we started, with the important subject of love. And Derek, please indulge us. Perhaps you'll end this live event, our contribution to World AIDS Day, by reading a final excerpt from your wonderful memoir, Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. You did that beautifully, hosting this event. And also, if I may take this opportunity to say a big thank you to all the utterly spectacular team at Watkins for showing faith in me, for undertaking to publish this memoir, and for guiding me so patiently and expertly through the complex processes involved in preparing a book for publication, and now, a process which is just starting, bringing it to the attention of the book reading public. My gratitude to all of you is very profound. Thank you also to you, my audience this evening, many of you, dear, dear, dear friends, for your time, for your interest, and for your support. For my final reading, I've actually changed what I was going to read. I was going to read something more specifically about love, but I've actually chosen a passage to remind us why we all continue to celebrate World AIDS Day, and why doing so remains as relevant today as it did back in 1988. Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS is dedicated to the memory of our many gay friends, many young gay friends and other friends who died from AIDS, to those like Jay who fought extraordinary battles to survive, and to all those many others who continue to live courageously with HIV infection. If there was a title for this end, it would be called Back to Key West. Jay and I make a trip to the old Cuban shack in spring 2005. We have made no other since. Key West has now become for us a place of ghosts. The house remains magical, but is filled with departed laughter. The island and ocean are as beautiful as ever, but have an emptiness that overshadows other feelings. So many went to Key West to die. Andrew Cleveland died. Dana Seven died. So many beautiful young friends died there. We cycled to the White Street Pier to visit the simple, dignified AIDS Memorial. We went to its inauguration at a time when our friends were still dying. So many tears were shed on that occasion. More than a few of those named on the memorial were our friends. As in former times, the pier is populated by the normal crowd of cyclists, fishermen, and hippie types, hanging out and waiting for the sun to drop into the sea and over the horizon. The day is ending, but it's still hot. Terns and seagulls line the pier's edge. They stand side by side, facing into the salty breeze and the golden light. There is movement in the water that attracts the attention of the terns. As one, they rise up into the warm air and hover there, gazing intently down into the sea. Then, suddenly, they stoop and make their vertical downward dive down into the water to spear their catch. To the birds and to the people here, it appears that nothing of moment has changed, that all is as it ever was. For Jay and I, too many are missing for us to feel the same. Only we, amongst those on the pier that evening, seemed to pause to read the names, to remember those who might still be with us, but no longer are. The sun dips over the horizon. The day is done. Soon it will be dark.